There we go. Well, hello, everybody, and especially hello to people of the future that will be watching this program, hopefully on YouTube and enjoying it. Today is October 28th, 2025, and along with our sort of usual cast of commentators, Alan Miller and George Foster, we have a special guest today, Dave Sprau, and we're going to look at a collection of photographs from Dave's collection and from elsewhere of former railroad employees, and we're going to share some reminiscences or ask questions or just generally, just kind of talk about it. And I'm going to unpin myself, I think, your host and moderator, and remove pin. I've done that. Dave, you're on camera, and I'm going to hopefully share some images. So hopefully the first image popped up online. And there's no particular order to these folks. We're just looking at people that we know and remember. And so what the first person, of course, is our dear friend, Ken Iverson. Dave, take it away.
Well, I would guess this picture would probably was taken in the very early 70s. That's Ken working at Tacoma. Can't tell what district he's working because he's got too much paper covering things up there. But,
he's got his train sheet in front of him, and one of those ubiquitous Burlington Northern notebooks. I actually have a couple of those myself. Were there a couple of dispatcher offices? Was this the office? I don't know.
Well, that's the office in the Union Station in Tacoma. It got remodeled a time or two during the length of my career, but basically it was the same office in the same part of the building, the old Union Station. Ken later became a company officer. He wound up being my boss, and he was a pretty good boss, except that the superintendent of transportation at that time was a guy named Ed Butler, who was a micromanager and wouldn't let poor Kenny just run the place by himself. He had to micromanage everything he did. And one day, Red Mueller came to me after the Milwaukee had folded up and said, "Is there any chance I could get on with the PN? All I need is a couple of days' work. If I could get that, I could stay around here. My daughter lives in Everett, and I'd kind of like to hang around here. Otherwise, I'm going to have to go back east and keep working." So I said, "Sure, we're short of help. I'll talk to the chief, and we can get you on. You'll get more than 3 days a week." So I talked to Ken, and he said, "Yeah, hire the guy, but I can't do it." He says, "I got to wait till Mr. Butler gets back, and he's gone on vacation for a month. If I hire this guy, he'll have my hide when he comes back." So we lost Ed Mueller on the Burlington Northern because of that.
So then he did have to go back east and get a job?
He had to go back east and never heard from him again, and he's since passed away. But
yeah.
Kenny would have gladly hired him, except that Kenny was not allowed. He had this shadow hanging over him the whole time that he was the chief dispatcher in Seattle. He was looking back in retrospect, we used to kind of make fun of the fact that Butler was pulling the strings, but that's not anything to laugh about. Kenny was held back a great deal. I think he would have been just fine if he could have run the place his own way by himself.
So as I look at this picture, Dave, he's got a dispatcher's train sheet. So would this be a non-CTC area?
Well, you had probably so, yes, probably, but you also have train sheets in CTC territory in those days. That was your double check or your backup, or how you kept track of what the hell you had going on besides just some moving lights on a panel.
Because I don't see any moving lights on a panel in the foreground here. That's another reason I thought maybe it wasn't CTC territory.
Yeah, I don't think so. But there's something suspicious down there in the lower left corner of the CTC of that panel in front of him. That definitely is not the south end panel. But there's something going on there. I had long been gone from Tacoma and couldn't tell you what that is. Why don't you ask Ken sometime? He can probably tell you.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I see him. I owe him a visit. So, and we think this would be the early 70s, and again we think this is probably a Jim Frederickson photo, right?
I'm pretty sure it's a Jim Frederickson, although by this time other people were starting to get in on the act and also taking pictures. So I just can't say for sure.
Okay, let's look at the next image, assuming I can get it to. And so this was just in this batch. It's a train crew. And do we have any idea why this picture is here? If not, we'll go to the next image.
No, I can talk, but Alan, you know that guy?
Don't recognize him, but I
Well,
probably do.
you will. The engineer is Ralph Edwards,
Oh, okay, yeah.
and that's his fireman. And unless I wrote it on the back of the picture, I don't know who that fireman is. But that was taken, but it's just a snapshot. It was some of the stuff that Ralph Edwards gave me after he retired, working somewhere on the Coast Division of the Milwaukee.
So where would you have known him from, Alan?
Well, he was a Milwaukee engineer that worked at a lot of same places I was working, and in fact, he married a woman operator from the Milwaukee Depot in Everett. Wilma Bauer was her name.
Oh, okay. I just pulled the original out of the envelope and I looked on the back and it says on one side Ralph Edwards, but the other side is blank.
Okay, then I don't know. Uh, in Alan's rather excellent presentation that you recorded about a week or 10 days ago or whenever it was, there's a picture of a snowplow rotary sitting at Laconia with, I believe, the blades spinning and a bunch of people standing around. Ralph's dad is the guy on the far left, Newton B. Edwards. He was an engineer.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah, well, I could add that to our notes, Alan. Yeah, his father was there. I don't think we knew that.
I have a Chicago, Milwaukee, and Puget Sound employees pass from Newton Edwards.
That's Ralph's dad.
Yeah.
And that's the guy on the right in this picture. It looks like he's got like a cigar or something in his hand, right?
Probably got a drink.
This road locomotive, I'm guessing.
Yeah, Ralph was a good engineer, and he didn't mess around very much or break very many rules. I doubt if that's a drink. I shouldn't have said that.
No, I know. You were making a joke, folks, just for the record. That was a joke, and statute of limitations is long gone on this photo anyway.
It could be coffee.
Yeah,
when Ralph gave me that picture, he told me who that fireman was, and it's somebody whose name I recognize, but you know how that goes.
yeah. Well,
that's the engine's probably the 250 or 251. They were S1 class engines, and the 250 was like the first S1 the Milwaukee ever got, and they had it. Yeah, that was the only one for years, and it was nicknamed Orphan Annie.
because it ran out here in the gap, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was. Was that a Northern?
Yeah.
Okay, okay, yeah. Because
Yeah, they were
261 would be an
250
S3.
and 251 were S1 class, and then later they got a fleet of S2s and S3s, I think they were.
George.
Yeah, I was going to ask, I'm having a little unstable connection here. So, was there a location of this photo?
No, just
No.
Ralph Edwards' name written on the back. That was it.
West of Clallam, that's all I can tell you.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's move
All
on.
right, thank you.
Oh, here's a familiar face. Okay, so Dave, when was this and where was this in your career roughly?
I would have been 20 years old. That was in the Tacoma office. Jim Fredrickson came in with his camera one day when I was not prepared to have my picture taken, as you can see, and took it anyway. And what more can I say?
You even got your top button, so you must have dressed up for this a little bit, right?
Oh my God, I'm wearing my t-shirt now for this important. I was supposed to put on something nice. Yeah, no, I had my top button just for the hell of it. I don't.
Okay, all right. So, but we
I
don't
think
know
his hair
based
looks
on this.
all,
What's that?
I think his hair looks all ruffled, but probably because he's been working and he's, oh, I got to get this done or whatever.
Yeah. So do we know what district you'd have been working on by this photo? Was some of them in different places than others, or what?
I can't say for sure that, the background would be so similar that I think it probably was the mountain district because I don't see, I see a high wall behind me
Yeah.
and it was over in a quadrant in the corner of the office that would have been configured like that. But the three desks that we were using out of the five that were available in that office were all together. I guess,
Let's see, the north, the mountain, and the south.
yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's keep chugging along. Now here you are, and this was supposed to be your last day on the Northern Pacific. What happened?
Supposed to be I think this is about the middle of July of 1969. This would have been a few years after that previous picture. And I was leaving the Northern Pacific to go to work for the Great Northern as a fireman. And Jim Fredrickson was the night chief. He brought his camera down to take a picture of myself and the guys I worked with on the last night, supposedly the last night that I worked. As it turned out, for reasons that I cannot exactly recall, I continued to work another week here in this office before I left.
Okay. And you short sleeve shirt with a nice narrow tie. You look very nice. In what division or district would this have been?
This would have been third trick on the double track north, the district that Tom Melvin died and left it to me in his will, so to speak. I hated that job. It was like a rubber stamp every night, issued the same orders at the same time, saying the same thing. And after a few months of that, it gets pretty old.
Okay.
I can't recall who he was, but there was a NP conductor in Auburn that referred to you as a dehorn dispatcher when you went firing.
Oh, that was probably Sloan, Don Sloan. There was all sorts of smart ass remarks. After I went firing one day, I was working a hostler job at Interbay, and I was fueling a bunch of engines and doing flunky work around the roundhouse. And in comes a crew, and I remember one of the brakeman was Doug Wells, and he says, "Look at that!" He says, "There's an NP dispatcher. That's a goddamn good job for an NP dispatcher, fueling our engines for us. Ha ha ha!" But I took it all.
Well, and Dave and I have some mutual friends, and of course, one of Dave's and my mutual friends used a term, a very, hard, coarse term to describe Dave, and I won't repeat it here. But Dave and I both considered it to be a compliment.
Yeah, and I talked to him later, and I said, I told him that. I said, "That's really very complimentary. You don't have to be embarrassed." And he said, "Well, I'm not."
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Dave had the fear of God put into this poor young clerk turned operator trying to figure out how to copy an order for Dave properly. It was just, and one of my high school friends. So anyway.
Well, I didn't do that to anybody when I knew that they were really new. I tried to help, but after they'd been there a while, that they were continuing to do things incorrectly, I could be a little hard to get along with sometimes.
Well, I mean, you like, as I've learned, you like things done a certain way, and as long as you do them that way, life is good. And if you don't do them that way, then life isn't as good. So,
well, yeah, I didn't like gross, stupid mistakes and misleading information given to me. That's what you rely on in order to keep things going. And
right.
Well, anyway, enough about that.
Well, keep them going here. Let's keep going on these pictures. So now where are you?
I'm working Whitefish to Sandpoint district in the old Seattle office. It was a temporary office that was built for us they desecrated the hallways of the King Street station upstairs and brought Tacoma over, put us all in an office. Then they brought Spokane over, and that's how this machine got there. Then they brought up Vancouver. and I wound up on this job between Whitefish and Sandpoint. Best job I ever had. Just a dream job. Very, very busy, but perfect in every other respect.
And this is all CTC with the panel and the lights and all that jazz.
Yeah, it was all CTC.
I just got to flip back here for a second. So this is 1969, roughly 68, 69. And this is when?
About 1985.
Okay. Yeah. Shirt and tie. You think,
He
you know,
likes the
just,
sound.
yeah, just the sign of the times. What can I tell you? Who do we, well, we just talked about him. Tell us the story, Dave.
Earl T. Melvin. He was a dispatcher who died in September of 1968 and got me off of the dispatcher's extra board and onto a regular job, namely his job. He had been around for, I guess, about 20 years. The poor guy, he had been in World War II over in Philippines or someplace, and he got some of those exotic diseases that you can pick up over there, and his health was never too good, and he died, I think he was in his 40s when he died.
Yeah, it doesn't look like he's that old in this picture. This NP calendar, so I'm guessing what, 68, 69 is this picture?
It's like
67.
67 on it.
67. Thanks, Alan.
Okay, well, and he died the following year because he died in September of 68.
And he was the third track north double track dispatcher.
Yeah, right. I mean, he could work any job in the office, of course, but he had bid that job in. And
I don't know. It seems like that would be more complicated than I think. I mean, it seems complicated all the way north from what, Tacoma to Seattle? Is that the boundary or what?
almost all the way to Sumas.
Tacoma all the way. Now, I can imagine once you get up in the hinterlands of Whatcom County, it could get to be the same old deal night in and night out. But didn't you have a lot of action between Tacoma and King Street and places like Stacy and places like that?
It was just the reverse because between Tacoma and Seattle was double track, and it's pretty hard to screw up anything on double track.
Oh,
You just give them a train order or a number clearance and let them go. But the north end, while it was pretty much the same trains every day, the time of the day that they ran turned out to be could be different, and you had to stay on top of that and pay attention. And if it was just the north end, I would have enjoyed it. But most of your work was between Seattle and Tacoma, and it was like paying attention to a cage full of mice or something. You know, it's just kind of routine, boring.
my recollection was that wasn't that North End train a scheduled train?
Well, they were, but they were never on time. They were
So
always
then you were always having to issue orders to fix the fact that they weren't running on schedule, right?
correct. You had to issue either write a track orders reversing their superiority, or at the always some wait orders so somebody could get somewhere for somebody else. And then there still were extras mixed up in that, and just a lot of stuff to pay attention to.
So in my foggy memory bank, Steve, I remember a story about how you annulled the train and then ran it as an extra so that the crew could get home for the 4th of July. How did that go? Do you remember? Remember that story?
That was before my time, but that was fairly common. If a assigned crew was going to be ready to go ahead of their timetable time, if they were regularly scheduled, like that Sumas train was,
Yeah.
or like number 264 on the Milwaukee was, the dispatchers would just routinely annul the schedule and run the train as an extra. And what you're referring to was on July the 4th, 1955, when the Everett time freight, it wasn't on the timetable, but its normal procedure was to go from Auburn to Everett early in the morning, tie up, get 8 hours rest, and come back late that afternoon. Well, on the 4th of July, they wanted to go to Everett and come right back. So they brought them right back. Ran them extra, but they brought them right back in the morning. Well, the fly in the ointment was when they got to Renton, came chugging through town in Renton, and coming up in the other direction on the old NP line was crew 2 with the engine running backwards, pushing a couple of cars, and they met on they met on a curve just south of the Renton Depot, and it killed the engineer on crew two. It was a steam engine. It kind of telescoped this tinder, smashed up the diesel engines, and there was, of course, a big stink over that and an investigation, and some people got fired and later reinstated. But anyway, that's what happened.
Was that the 557, that Jeep?
I believe it was.
Yeah.
There was another rear ender at Quindle with that one of those 550 something series engines. Either I think it was before that.
Okay. Well, Mr. Melvin. And now who's this fellow, Dave?
Jimmy Wise. James
Okay.
Wise. WYSE. You know, he never did anything spectacular. He was I mean, he didn't get into any of these legendary stories that I know of. He's just one of the guys that worked there. And when I knew him, he had a job that worked I think 3 nights as a trick dispatcher and 2 nights as the assistant chief on second trick, relieving the second trick chief. And Jim was a good dispatcher, and he followed the rules carefully and was did a really good job. But he just somehow never got into the legendary stuff.
So just a note for the files here, folks, people that don't show up in the legendary incidents are people that had nice careers where everything went smooth, right?
Yeah. In contrast, his brother, Glenn Wise, was a well-known kind of a ne'er-do-well, was always getting into trouble or getting into fights over something. Glenn was a second trick operator at Arlington. And, I get caught flat-footed with this kind of stuff with these when this comes up in a thing like we're having today, and I can't think of what else to say, what kind of stories to tell you. But I know Glenn was always getting into scrapes of some kind, and he eventually got fired. He was totally not like Jim at all. You wouldn't even think they were related, and in fact, you could see a resemblance in their faces, but other than that, they really didn't even look alike.
Yeah, interesting. So, Walt, before I forget, before I get too far afield, now, Dave, you were the Pacific Coast dispatcher at Maple Valley at one point in time. Is that right?
Well, the correct way to state it is that I was the BN dispatcher working in the former Pacific Coast office at Maple Valley. But yes.
So did you ever dictate an order to a telegrapher named Alan Miller?
Oh, yeah, many times.
So okay, are there any legendary stories there while we've tipped this rock over?
No.
Okay, just curious.
No, I mean, unless Alan can think of something, I can't think of anything. I know that, I knew Alan casually we both kind of grew up on the Milwaukee Everett line and had guys on the Everett line like Red Griffin and the engineer and Ralph Edwards and probably Alan. I could start naming names. I just as soon hear Alan's version of it. The same people that were good to him on the Everett line were good to me and helped get our careers launched. And so I've known Alan ever since he first showed up here. And, I'd bump into him occasionally. I didn't get into a situation where he copied train orders for me really until after 1970. I think, Alan, you were at Tacoma Junction a while, but mostly at Kent.
Yeah, when they put the CTC on the joint line, they closed Tacoma Junction. And so Kent inherited those former Pacific Coast orders that they used to put out there at JN. And so Dave would, he was you were the relief dispatcher there, weren't you? Worked kind of all the shifts or?
Yeah, and occasionally I'd use my seniority to move up on vacancies there. But yeah, that was primarily, I was the relief dispatcher there.
Yeah, because I think I had McFarland most of the time as the dispatcher there on second trick, but you would come in a couple of days a week.
So just as an administrative note, Alan just did this really cool program a couple of weeks ago on the Great Northern Cherry Valley line, Dave, which a line that only existed for 6 years, Alan, something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
1911 to 1917, and then they ran over to Milwaukee for a couple of years and then kind of came out of the valley completely.
And Alan, you're working on another program on the Milwaukee Road Everett branch, aren't you?
Yep.
Yeah. Any idea what our timeline is on that?
It's going to run 2 hours.
Oh, that part's okay. What do you
Yeah.
think? Sometime in November we'll get this up?
Yeah. Well, I'll have it done. I was going to try another recording today, but this came up,
Yeah.
and I think there's a Zoom meeting tomorrow. But
Zoom meeting
anyway, I
tomorrow. Yeah.
I've got one in the can, but I'm not totally happy with it, so I'm going to do another take and see if I can get it down.
Because he just, I mean, I can tell you, it's perfection. I mean, these programs are so great. There's no dogs barking. There's nobody knocking on the door trying to sell encyclopedias. I mean, there's
Yeah, I
nothing.
had to euthanize my wife's dog, but you got to sacrifice something.
There you go. Let's get back to this program today. Let's go to our next image. Who's this? Dave?
That's Charles Clayton McLean, better known as Clayton McLean, dispatcher in Tacoma. On uh, he laid off on July 1st, 1964, so that I could get a dispatcher's seniority date. But he didn't lay off for a happy reason. His wife had been diagnosed with an illness. He had to take her to the hospital, and the unhappy outcome of that was she died a few years later. But
Oh,
anyways, thanks to him laying off on that day, I got my dispatcher's date a little earlier than I would have. He called me. He called me in a couple of days before that. He says, "Hey, I see where you're lined up to go to work. I think it was somewhere in the second week of July on some other job." And he says, "Why don't you come in tomorrow and break in with me?" And he says, "I need to lay off the next day and you can work that job." And so I came in and broke in with him on the day shift on the double track north, and he wrote out a note to the chief that I was qualified. The next day they put me to work. He later wound up as the head guy in the safety and rules department for the Burlington Northern Railroad in St. Paul, and later as they moved to Overland Park, Kansas. He wound up being the head guy in the rules department.
wow.
They just didn't just take him as a dispatcher and give him that job. He went up through the ranks after the merger and worked various official positions with the BN until he wound up head of the rules department.
Do you know where this picture was taken?
Yeah, that's the window looking out towards what is it, Commencement Bay in Tacoma from the dispatcher's office.
21st Street.
Yeah, double track north.
But but they have a Milwaukee Road calendar.
Oh, we got that calendar and hung it on the wall. We didn't stand on ceremony about stuff like that. We
Okay.
had calendars and Milwaukee calendars and pinup calendars and all sorts of stuff hanging on the wall.
Oh yeah, back in the day. Yeah, that was a little more. Yeah, vaguely remember that as a child. Yes. So let's see what else we've got here.
John Hokinson, or if you pronounce it phonetically, it would be Hawkinson, but John Hokinson, a dispatcher in Tacoma. I used to relieve him every night at midnight on the double track north. He's a good dispatcher, very conscientious. Got all
And
his
go ahead.
had all his work done, had everything ready for his relief. We didn't have to just sit down and just go to work and try to catch up with stuff that hadn't been done when you relieved him. He did an excellent job. Good guy and a good guy to relieve, and a very pleasant fellow to have around the office. Never lost his temper and never got surly or hard to get along with or anything.
So the backstory on this fellow, Mr. Hokinson, Hokinson,
Hokinson.
Hokinson. Mr. Hokinson is from Anacortes, Washington, along with none other than the legendary Gary Tarbox, the founder of the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive. And Mr. Hokinson had a car. And so Gary rode with him down to Seattle, and they took pictures of steam locomotives at the Hanford Street Roundhouse. And that was one of the formative moments in Gary's career, he tells me, and his interest from trains certainly emanated from his friendship with John Hokeson, who went on to fame and fortune working at the Georgia Pacific Tissue Mill, making toilet paper in Bellingham, Washington.
Yeah, he quit the Burlington Northern in 1973. He resigned as a train dispatcher in '73. Went to work with Georgia Pacific, pushing a broom, and immediately went up through the ranks at Georgia Pacific. Wound up being I don't know what, so I don't want to say, but I know that he had a fairly decent, respectable job with them when he retired from Georgia Pacific. I turned off my camera for a minute because my wife brought me a little lunch here. You don't need to see me chewing away and spilling stuff on my
Oh
shirt.
my gosh, it is lunchtime. All right. Well,
Well, that's the best part.
yeah. I mean, you're just going to make the rest of us hungry, Dave.
Does anyone know if Gary Tarbox had a relative that worked as a conductor on the Milwaukee Road? I have an old union book that has listings of union grievances, and there was a conductor Tarbox that worked on, I believe, either the Muscle Shell Division or the Trans-Missouri Division. But that's kind of an unusual name, so I kind of thought it might be related.
It is an unusual name, and I know that Gary grew up in Anacortes, went to Anacortes High School, but where the family was prior to that, I think his dad was a farmer.
Oh,
That'll be a good question because I talk to Gary on a pretty regular basis. He's a pretty good friend. And so I'll just need to ping him one of these days and see if his family. That's quite possible, Alan. So that's a great question, and thanks for bringing that up, and I'll try to remember. So Dave, where's this picture taken at before we go to the next image?
That is the double track North dispatcher's job in Tacoma, same one as Clayton McLean in the earlier picture, but this is after that office was remodeled with newer windows and paneling on the walls, but it's basically the same physical spot. He's sandwiched between the mountain dispatcher and the double track south dispatcher in the three little cubicles.
Okay, so this is with the old windows in the old styling, and then this is that 70s when they put wood paneling up on everything, right?
Now, in '67, they did that, yeah.
67. Okay, yeah, there you go. And aluminum windows versus the old wood case windows these probably didn't open too well anymore, and these at least would open a little bit. Is that?
The other ones would open because we needed fresh air in there a lot. But they were cumbersome. Yeah,
Yeah,
cumbersome.
okay, all right. Okay. And we talked about this guy in the pregame show, and it was a really great story, but now I forget. So,
Richard L. Noble, and he was a dispatcher in Tacoma. When I was in training, he exhaustively trained me very patiently on rules and on train orders, and gave me hypothetical examples and worked them out with me. He was a really nice, patient, good guy, and I credit him with a lot of what I learned about train orders. There is an interesting connection that he had.
yeah,
I think we'll let Alan tell about that.
Alan.
well, his father was Frank Noble, who was a conductor in the early days on the Milwaukee Road Pacific Extension, and the guy who worked as a brakeman on the Milwaukee in the early days on the what was called the Columbia Division, Maxwell Swan. In 1945, he submitted a bunch of reminiscences of his working days to Railroad Magazine, and I think it was published in 4 parts, and it was called Wanderlust. And he talks about working for a conductor Noble over around Kittitas, and he was on a work train, and he had to flag at Kittitas, and Noble didn't come back when he was supposed to, and the Olympian was held up there, and they were trying to browbeat him into letting them go, and he stood fast and held them, and then finally Noble showed up, and he had derailed a car out there in his work limits, and so that's what prevented him from getting in there. But anyway, he discussed working for Noble and said that he never did measure up to his expectations to Noble, so he got off of his crew and went on to somebody else's crew. But anyway, that was this dispatcher's dad that was the guy that was in those stories.
And so
One
then
of the
go ahead, Dave.
one of the disadvantages of doing a program spontaneously like this is that I forget things and there's no way to look it up now. But when I went to work as a fireman on the Great Northern, there was a fireman there who was ahead of me, and I can't remember the guy's name. He became an engineer on the BN. He was married to Dick Noble's daughter, and I found that out only after I'd come to work there. The guy says to me, you know Dick Noble? I married his daughter.
Wow. Well, you railroaders.
This is how, everybody's related to everybody else.
Everybody's related to everybody else. Yeah. So, and Mr. Noble, as a Northern Pacific dispatcher, he always kind of favored the other side, didn't he, a little bit?
Oh, no, I wouldn't say he favored the other side, but he sure took care of those Milwaukee guys. He gave them a little better attention than he would have needed to do, and I think it was just out of loyalty to the company that provided food and clothing for his family when he was young.
Yeah, just out of respect for his dad, I guess, right?
His dad's railroad, yeah.
His dad's railroad. So,
That's Dwayne Douglas Tone, otherwise known as Duke Tone. Another case of being related to everybody in the world.
okay.
Related to Bud Emmons because he married Bud's sister. Of
Oh,
course, he's an uncle to Gary Emmons, and most people know who Gary is.
yeah, yeah.
There were a whole bunch of Tones working on the railroad already. They were his uncles and cousins and his father, and then what the heck, his Jan Kinney, railroad clerk and stenographer, Gary Emmons' sister. I could just start rattling off people he's related to.
Go right ahead, So he's left-handed, and this is in Tacoma after they remodeled that space?
Yeah, that's that double track north desk, I'm pretty sure. I lost my train of thought about something else some other notable thing I was going to tell about.
Hey,
He's going to
Dave.
tell us about all the people he's related to.
Oh, I know. His brother was the principal, was it, at Franklin Pierce High School?
Oh,
His brother, Gene Tone, E.P. Tone, was also an operator and worked in the summer as an operator, but he was a principal at one of the high schools in Tacoma.
Did he have a relative named Daryl?
Oh, probably.
I think Daryl was a police officer in Tacoma who went to church with him up on K Street. He looks like Daryl, so that's why I asked.
Yeah, he probably was. Related. There are a bunch of them in Tacoma.
yeah. Well, the tone of the times or time of the tones, one of the other. Anyway, the tones time is up, and we're going to move on to our next image at 12:38.
Richard D. Leary, Dick Leary.
Okay, and this is after 1967, I'm guessing, because of the paneling.
It's a little hard to tell in that picture. Yeah, it is because of the paneling. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And Dick was a dispatcher in Tacoma. Worked there many years. Came to Seattle. Worked in Seattle for a while. And his very first day commuting to Seattle, got into a car wreck on I-5. I said, well, that's a good way to start off working in a new office. His brother, I think his brother's name was Cliff Leary. His brother was the vice president of the Sioux Line.
Oh,
But they had both gotten their start as operators on the Sioux Line, and on the Sioux Line in Enderlin, North Dakota.
which would be on the Sioux Line main line, I think. I don't know. I'm not that versant on the Sioux Line in North Dakota, I have to admit. So, no memorable legendary stories about Mr. Leary?
Well, the only thing that I would say about him is after Don McGregor retired, the guy that handled all the operators and dispatchers relief for many years, Dick got the job. And he did the same kind of a job as McGregor. He took real good care of us. He was he never became the boss, but he was our boss. And if you needed to have a day off or something, he got it for you. And I think unlike Don McGregor, who was kind of a happy-go-lucky guy, I think Dick kind of helped ruin his health, was worrying about being able to get people off so they could go to a wedding or funeral or some other thing. We all liked him. Everybody liked Dick. He was just didn't have an enemy in the world, and that's not to say that the other dispatchers did have enemies, but there were some dispatchers that people just didn't care for. They called them nasty names and things like that. Never heard anything bad said about Dick.
You mean like people calling people nasty names, like people call you Dave sometimes?
Oh, yes, that's kind of what I mean.
Yeah.
And as we find out, if you dig into it very far, most of us are, even though the nasty name there's good reason for it, and it might have even been deserved. There are very few dispatchers who were actually hated. There were a couple. I don't
Well,
think
you did have that one engineer, Dave, on the was it on the B end or the great would be on the B end that finally got tired of you out there around Havre somewhere, right? What happened there?
Oh, that was practically at the end, nearly the end of my career just before I quit.
Get a load of this, George. Could you believe? Yeah, Dave, tell the story.
Well, in about 1970, I wasn't getting a lot of dispatcher work around Seattle. So I went to Havre a couple different times. And one time when I went there, I bid a job in. And it was a really good job. It was afternoons between Havre and the North Dakota border at Bainville. And I got to be friends with all the train and engine men, and we all got along great. Everything worked good, and it was a good job. And finally, I was able to bid back into Seattle, so I left Havre. Well, that would have been about 1975. Fast forward 20 more years, and I'm working in Seattle. And I'd been on that Whitefish to Sandpoint job for about 12 years, and I got bumped by Johnny Bullis. I forget how he got a bump, but he bumped me. I think he was number 2 on the seniority list, and I was number 3 by that time. But when number 2 bumps number 3, you got to go. So I was looking for a place to land, and I thought, well, I'll go over on that second trick Havre to Bainville job. That was a good job when I had it 20 years ago. I'll just go bump onto that. So I did. Well, big surprise. It had about twice as many trains. And all of the good old guys that I remembered, engineers and conductors, they were all gone, replaced by people I didn't know, most of whom were okay. But one day I had an empty grain train start east out of Havre, meeting just the whole damn world, meeting a westbound at every station almost. And they were all higher priority trains. And so I started having to head him in. And finally, after I'd headed him in for about 4 or 5 westbound trains, he calls me on the radio and he's sneering and getting really snarling. He says, I've had to head in here on every one of these meets. What kind of a dispatcher are you, more or less? And I basically told him, well, tomorrow when you come west on one of those trains with high priority, then everybody else can head in for you. But in the meantime, you got the coldest cars in town. Well, he didn't like being told that. The next time I headed him in at Wolf Point, Montana, was still a whole bunch of more trains coming westbound and more trains behind him. He intentionally broke the train in 2 at Wolf Point in the siding and just tied up the whole damn railroad. It just made a mess of everything. And I still remember his name. I'm not going to say it here, but I remember his name.
That's okay.
And I just quit about a month after that. And they say about how dispatchers have a little black book and they do this and they do that. Well, we really didn't. I mean, once in a while you'd get a little comfort out of paying somebody back for some real or imagined offense of the day or the week before. But generally speaking, if you dispatch your trains that way, you're not only a jerk, but you're also letting yourself in for more trouble than it's worth. But I can tell you, if I'd have lasted any length of time, that guy would have been on the shit list forever. Because I know he did it intentionally. And anyway, that's the story.
So just to kind of reiterate our rules on these programs is that we can either talk about the people or we can talk about what they did. But in a case like this, where it's not a happy story, we can only talk about one or the other because this is not an opportunity to, there's no time for retribution on this show. So George, um, well, you were in a train crew. Now, did you ever have dispatchers that were, I mean, what's the flip side of this?
Well, I personally didn't really have a thing for dispatchers. There's some that when I'm not saying they were difficult to work with, but some that I don't think they quite got it as well as other dispatchers, as far as the really snapping into the job. But for the most part, they were okay. There was one that was real cautious because of an incident that occurred at another time, and so he tended to be. When you talk to him, he would pause for quite a while before he would give you an answer about something, so that because I think he was dogged by the memory of whatever had happened, whether it was his or not his fault. So there was that. Um, Mostly, I was pretty respectful of the dispatchers, except one night when a signal was taken away from me without him telling me he was going to do so. And fortunately, I had the train not at track speed for that area. And when I came around the corner, it was in the blues. There was a red in my face. Now I dumped the air and I got stopped. But I talked to him and I said, I had a clear signal leaving this station, and you took it away without first asking me if you could do so. And I mean, it was a grain train. I could have dumped everything all over the, you know, landscape, but fortunately, the train stayed together. But most of the time, I had pretty good relations with dispatchers, and especially in the blues, we did a lot of what we called jawbone dispatching. So if I was on a train and I thought I could get to another siding, I would talk to the dispatcher about that. Or if there was a couple times when I tried to help other guys out that had engine trouble or something like that, and I would ask if he's between switches at say Huron, can I pull up beside him and maybe see what's going on and help him out a little bit? And that happened one night, and the guy had an engine that wouldn't load right, and so I got on his train and looked at the lead unit was fine, but the a trailing unit wouldn't load right, and so what happened is we experimented a little bit with isolating and then putting the engine back on light, and finally it loaded correctly, and he was able to go up the hill. But you know, we were real conscious of doing things like that because we knew that if we were stuck somewhere, we were really stuck, and a lot of times they couldn't get relief to us before we went dead or other things, that were important. But for the most part, I liked the dispatchers I worked with. And maybe it was coming from train order days when I understood the flip side of it, and I'd seen some engineers that were disrespectful or, just couldn't seem to get over the road without some kind of snide comments,
Hmm.
you know. So, you know,
Well, there you go. Thanks. Let's keep going. We've got a few more pictures to look at. We're about 50 minutes in.
I would agree with George, though. I got
Yeah.
dispatchers aren't perfect. I sure as hell wasn't. I made mistakes. Anyway, so, okay.
So now who we got here?
The guy on the left was a dispatcher in Tacoma, Don McGregor. His dad was Don was from Prosser, Washington. His dad was Bruce McGregor. He was an old Scotsman, and he also was a state representative in the legislature from Prosser. But Don was just a plain old ordinary shoe dispatcher in Tacoma. He wound up being assistant chief in charge of handling dispatchers and operators relief. And he just couldn't have been nicer to us. He saw to it that if you needed to be off or something important was going on, that you got the day off you needed, and he was just as accommodating as could be. The guy next to him is Don Shane, another dispatcher off the NP in Tacoma. They went up to, well, I don't know, somewhere around Wickersham just to look at a wreck. This picture is taken of the occasion. Don is overdressed, and Don McGregor is overdressed for his status on the railroad, and Don Shane is just about right for a dispatcher that's not on duty going up to look at a wreck.
And Don, on the north end somewhere. What would your guess as to the year of this be?
About 1956, 7.
Okay. All right. I was 2. So,
before my time.
Now who we got? We talked about these guys in the pregame show.
The guy in the foreground is Robert J. Smith. He was. I use this in a kind of a respectful, but in a joking way. I use the word legendary engineer on the Great Northern. He was definitely an engineer's engineer. There wasn't anything about running an engine or handling a train that he didn't know or couldn't do. The guy next to him is George Liu. He's the guy in the background. He was our locomotive engineers union representative, the local chairman for the engineers, and also an engineer on the Great Northern. I worked with both of them. R.J. Smith showed me, as a fireman, how to handle a freight train up the hill and through the Cascade Tunnel and down the other side. And he was just as nice as could be about it, and matter of fact, and now do this, and now do that, and you see how this works. And okay, wasn't that easy? Just real good guy. But some of the firemen were just terrified of him, because I guess he could be pretty nasty if he discerned that you didn't really care about whether you learned anything or not, which is, I was kind of like that too. George was, all I can say about George is he was a good engineer. He didn't exude all of the bells and whistles that R.J. Smith did, but he could handle a train perfectly well. I worked with him also. And George was a nice guy. They're just always pleasant.
When and where was this picture, do you think?
This was taken, I think, at Everett at one of those Great Northern reunions in the year, probably, just guessing, but probably about 1983 or 84.
Okay. Because it's in color, and we again assume that this is a Jim Fredrickson photo.
No, that's not a Fredrickson photo.
Oh, whose is it?
Jim would not have attended that thing.
That's what I just kind of just caught myself there. Yeah, he wouldn't go to a Great Northern event, so.
Well, I mean, not that he wouldn't, but I was at that event, and Jim wasn't there. He didn't go to those. Okay. I don't know who the photographer is.
Okay.
There were lots of pictures got taken at those events, so maybe Stuart Aldcroft.
Oh, okay. Well, if you've got a chance to give somebody a credit, we should. So.
Yeah. Cameron Leslie Galbraith. He was he was a dispatcher in Tacoma. He wound up after Clayton McLean left Tacoma as a promoted man. Cameron wound up with a day job on the double track north, but he had worked all the jobs in the office in Tacoma. He had been the agent at Ravensdale at one time after Mrs. Floberg retired.
So, I see these guys. I saw a picture of you earlier with this. Is that a microphone that hangs around your neck? How does that work?
That's exactly the same kind of a breastplate telephone that telephone operators used to wear. It was so that both of your hands were free, and that you could talk and be clearly heard by the people at the other end. They didn't have dynamic microphones like they do today. They used to have microphones and speakers that you had to have your mouth right up to them, talking right into them, or you couldn't be heard. So this was the answer to that. By strapping one of those things on, you could be heard, and both of your hands were free. And the incoming voice came through a speaker, a loudspeaker, which left you completely hands-free to do your job.
So this is in the Tacoma Depot before it was remodeled, right?
Yeah, with the old pegboard wallboard.
Yeah, the pegboard thing, and then it looks like he's got Castle Rock and Oolacua in the background, right? On his map on the wall.
I can't see it that well, but if you're seeing that and he's working the double track south district, and yeah, that'd be right because it was over in the opposite corner, and that's the the corner behind his head. There is the corner of the Seattle end of the depot.
So what's this thing off to the right? Let's see if my cursor works. This thing over here, if you could see my cursor, what is
That's
that?
that's the local telegraph sounder that would Morse code would come in on whichever circuit you had chosen to plug in on. And it was, as you can see, it's kind of an echo chamber type of thing. It makes the Morse nice and loud and clear so you can hear it plainly. All of those jobs in Tacoma, all the branch lines were Morse telegraph. They weren't telephone. They were telegraph right up until the mid 60s.
Now, Alan, our railroad, the Milwaukee Road, we were always telephones, right? We never had Morse code.
They had Morse, but it was a backup. Even when they first opened the extension in 1909, it was telephone equipped, and the telegraph was just meant to be a backup.
So then did you ever learn Morse, Alan, or not?
I never learned it. It wasn't required when I hired out, but
Yeah.
they still had it. The relay office used it in Tacoma, and a few stations like Cedar Falls and Cle Elum and stuff still had the active Morse, but a lot of the stations like Kent and Auburn and Sumner, it had all been disconnected by that time.
Okay. Yeah.
I should clarify, our main lines on the NP and on the Great Northern were telephone ever since about 1910, but they kept the branch lines, most of them were Morse, and remained so until the early 60s. There were exceptions to that, but until the early 60s. And the Milwaukee used Morse on their branch lines. When I was at Monroe learning this business, the Everett line was all Morse. Doesn't mean that the dispatcher wouldn't ask the operator at Cedar Falls to connect his phone to the Everett line phone, and then they would shout at each other over that phone. But just general things like train orders and OSs of trains passing the station. We worked with the Milwaukee dispatcher at Tacoma on Morse in Monroe, and I can remember copying orders in the afternoon for the Everett logger on, Morse.
So then we could sort of place this picture in time because there's still Morse in it's in the unremodeled Tacoma Depot then. So this would put it in the early 1960s.
No, this is about 1957 or 58. Same bunch of series as those other pictures Jim Fredrickson took.
Okay, and this is another Jim Fredrickson photo then. Okay,
Yeah.
nice.
Frank Ryan. He was he had been the agent for the NP at Gackel, North Dakota during the Depression, right after the Depression, off the Fargo division, and then he came out to Seattle because his dad was a dispatcher in Tacoma. His dad had been a Seattle dispatcher on the NP when they had that office. And Frank worked as a dispatcher in Tacoma. I worked with him after Jim Fredrickson. Let me think here now. No, Jim Fredrickson. Yeah, after Jim Fredrickson got promoted, Frank became my night chief and my boss. He was an okay guy to work for. I got nothing bad to say about Frank. He was an all right guy. I just didn't work with him all that much. I wasn't, for some reason, coincidentally, we just didn't wind up on a lot of the same shifts.
No legendary stories then.
Nothing that comes to mind. I suppose after this is over, I'll think of something that he might have.
It's just that's the way these programs go, and it gives us fodder for the next go round. So
yeah,
He's all buttoned up too. Did you notice?
all the way to the top. Yeah.
Yep.
It must be summer, I'm guessing, if you got a short sleeve shirt on. It doesn't have to be.
probably. Well, now I know who this is. George, do you know who that is?
Is that Dave Steinhoff?
That's who it is.
Yeah, I know I don't think I ever met Dave, but like I said, we all like Alan and I, we all worked with Dan, and
Was that his
then
son?
Dan went on to UP.
Dan and Dave were father and son, or son and father, of course, but they really weren't really very much alike. Dave was, Dave pictured here, was a very particular dispatcher, and he dispatched by the rules, and he did a real good job. But he was a little, let's just say, a little bit more personable off the job. Dan tended to be kind of a. Now, don't get me wrong. Dan and I are still friends. I talk to him occasionally.
Oh,
Dan could be kind of as his dad did. On the job, they were kind of similar.
particular, did it by the rules, everything went fine, no legendary stories.
When I
Well,
was back, yeah, excuse me, when I was back in St. Louis or excuse me, in yeah, it might have either been 89 or 90, I should say, 91 in Omaha. I went to the dispatch center, and one of the first guys I run into is Dan Steinhoff. He had moved over, and they made him, and I think at that time he was a chief, or else he was a supervisor of dispatchers. So he had, he was real suit and tie in that place and everything and all that. And I ran into Jim Scammon and some others there also.
I
Well,
think I think Dan helped design that dispatching center in Omaha when he was
probably
back
did.
there.
Yeah,
Probably.
possibly because, you guys were out by 1980, so he could
Yeah,
have easily had time before I saw him again
yeah.
to
Well, he's
be
one of the
doing that.
four. He was one of the four Milwaukee dispatchers that went to the UP when they gave up the joint line.
oh, okay.
Yep.
And I still hear from Dan. He emails me every once in a while and even calls me on the phone every now and again.
Well,
Well, tell
maybe
him
we
to
should reach
get
out
the
to him and drag him into this morass of conversation.
Yeah, yeah. You really should. You really should, because I hope I didn't give the wrong impression. Dan's full of information, and he's glad to talk about it. He's a little bit more laid back now that he's retired and everything.
I had a lot of fun talking to him on the phone from Black River. So, we always hit it off and everything. And like I said, it was good to see him in Omaha and kind of, old head, like we always call it.
Well, okay.
Um,
So let's get a
uh,
hold of this guy. See what we can
Now
do.
here's a good time. Here's a good time for a story, though.
Okay.
One thing that's different when you're talking about UP dispatchers and dispatchers elsewhere is that the UP dispatchers were company officers. They didn't have a union. They were company officers. All the dispatchers on the NP and G in Milwaukee, they were all union. Seniority prevailed. There was you didn't have to rely on the good old boy system. Everything was seniority, and you couldn't be just fired like they could on the UP. They just kick your ass out the door. And on the other railroads, you went through the regular grievance procedure in order to discipline a dispatcher. Well, Dan goes over to the UP, and he's working there. And now this is the story as told to me by someone whom I knew very well, who lived in Chicago. The man in Chicago was a ham radio operator, as was Dan, and somehow they got together on Sidewire on ham radio, and were blabbing away. And this went on for 2 or 3 or 4 nights about how each was had been an operator and dispatcher on the railroad, and they were using handles, in other words, not their real name. Well, after about a week of this, it was time to, shall we say, identify ourselves. And so Dan identified himself rather than by his handle. He says, "I'm Dan Steinhoff. I'm a dispatcher for the UP in Omaha." And the other man in Chicago says, "My name is Barney Hilbert, and I'm the president of the Train Dispatchers Union in Chicago."
Oh,
And Barney Hilbert says, that was the end of that. There was nothing more said by him. He never called me again. He wouldn't respond to any of my, to any of my inquiries. He wouldn't make, that was the end of the contact. Because on the UP, if they found out that you were associating with somebody having to do with organizing the dispatchers into a union, you just might be history the next day. So Dan wisely just dropped Barney like a hot potato when he found out he'd been conversing in Morse sidewire with the president of the dispatchers union.
Yeah, the company you keep. Yeah. So, well,
Big oops.
yeah, but happy ending. So,
yeah, and they weren't talking union stuff.
oh, they were talking union stuff. No.
There's Dave again.
This says Mission Possible on his pen protector for his shirt.
Who knows? That's probably some buzzword of the day on the Burlington Northern. They're always coming up with some stupid thing. I don't know what that is. Dave was a double track dispatcher. He worked the double track south when it was train order operation, and he by his own admission, he never worked the north end. He said he might have worked it 1 or 2 days, but he hated it and didn't know anything about it. Always was able to hang out south of Tacoma. But one day he bid in the mountain job, single track with train orders. And he was pretty good. He did a pretty good job. And when I was breaking in as a dispatcher, he taught me how to dispatch that South Bend branch. It had the 2 Chehalis Western trains, plus the Milwaukee local, plus the NP local, all running at the same time, getting each other's hair. And he taught me how to fix that thing up, so it was absolutely foolproof. But it was very difficult. It took a lot of train orders. He knew how to do it. He taught me that. Well, along comes along comes Don Shane on this fella Steinhoff's days off and showed me a real easy way to do it. Much, much easier than Dave, but it had the problem that if something went wrong, it was kind of hard to fix. Don qualified me on the job, whereas Dave wouldn't do it because I hadn't quite learned his completely complicated way of doing it, and he didn't feel confident. Don turned around and qualified me right away. But I don't hold that against Dave at all. Dave was a damn good dispatcher and taught me a lot, and I owe him a lot of thanks for it. That's all I'm going to say. There's no.
That's all you need to say. George, didn't you drive trains out to the coast for the Union Pacific?
Yeah, and I was going to say that Dave exercised what I call due diligence, and like I said, he had a hold of what he needed to do. He had a real good grasp of it. Yes, I operated out to Hoquiam, and occasionally I was never assigned out there, but as always as an extra vacancy, and it wasn't bad. It was made so you could usually get back within the hours of service. I think a long time before that, if you had a lot of work along there, they might have made, pardon me, they might have made Hoquiam a layover point. But when I was doing it, you turned and came right back.
We did that program last week on the south end of the Milwaukee line. Remember, we had those 2 pictures of that Milwaukee train going through Chehalis Junction, and I'm looking at the dispatchers panel here in the background, sort of replaying what they were doing as I am looking at the various signals there. So
sure.
Yeah, that's a real good comparison to that picture of a few days ago. That tells it all right there.
Tells it all right there. Yeah, the CC&C, the Milwaukee branching off. Yeah. So, well, we got a few pictures left. This is the elder.
That's Clifford Walter Johnson, C.W. Johnson. We called him Junior. He had been at one time the chief dispatcher on the White Pass in Yukon at Skagway. When he retired, he was a train dispatcher on the Union Pacific at Los Angeles. But in this picture, he's working the mountain district on the NP in Tacoma.
There's a
And
boomer for you. Yeah, it's just up on the White Pass. That's
he's
quite out
another
of the railroad.
he's another guy that taught me a lot.
Really?
He just like Dick Noble, he exercised me when I was breaking in on, now what would you do if this happened? What would you do? Now here's this form of order. Now what does this mean and what do you do? And he taught me the ropes. And hey, I don't want to change the subject, but that's another thing I forgot. Dick Noble went to the White Pass in Yukon as chief dispatcher. Didn't like the job, came back to Tacoma and started over again. And that was back in the early 40s. He said, I don't regret it. He says, I was ahead of Clayton McLean when I quit and went up there. And when I came back, I had to hire out behind him. But he says, other than that, it didn't hurt me. A good experience.
Yeah, it's pretty, even today, the White
Wow.
or Skagway is pretty remote. I was up there on a Pete Laro charter. And they had 12,000 cruise ship passengers in town on one day. It was just pandemonium.
Anyway,
This poor guy, Dave, this poor guy
that's
worked
Ray.
himself to death, didn't he?
That's Ray Smith. Yeah, and I don't know what district he's working. This is in the old Tacoma office before I worked there. They had remodeled it one more additional time, and here he is in the old office. This is in 1943, I think. Ray became the relief assistant chief dispatcher in Tacoma, and he died the day before, or on the same day as Tom Melvin. So I wound up not only being the junior assigned dispatcher, then the guy behind me got a regular job, and that was Arnold McFarland got a regular job out of the deal too. But both Ray Smith and Tom Melvin died on the same weekend. Now this is Smith working a trick job. When he was an assistant, he was a worrywart, nicest guy in the world. But he worried about everything. He actually would hold his head in his hands and say, "Oh my God, I don't know what is going to happen. And he was just a bundle of nerves. He died at age 63 with basically of a stroke, there's a lesson to be learned there. He had a very interesting guy. He had been agent at Carbonado, Washington.
Sure.
Told a story about a guy coming in with a herd of sheep. He didn't bring sheep in the office, but he needed a cattle car to ship these sheep to a place called Wingate, which was on the Crocker branch and of the same piece of railroad. And he says, why don't you just drive them across the river? It's right. Wingate is, 50 miles, or not 50, maybe more like about 35 miles away by rail, but it's right across the river on the map. And he says, sheep won't go across the river. I've tried it. They won't go. We got to ship them in a car. So Ray says, I got him here. Cattle car. He loaded them and we shipped them over to Wingate. And 2 days later, he unloaded them all. And it's like, let them out of the car and then look up the bank there. And you're looking at Carbonado where they came from. He had also been agent at Malone, which is down by Satsop or Elma. He was good for a story or two. Interesting old fella.
Is that the radio speaker on that accordion in the background, or what is that?
Radio, that's 1943. That's the telephone speaker in 1943.
Okay, so you would talk into the thing that was hanging on his chest, and you would listen on the thing that was on that accordion. Okay.
Yep, that's right.
You'd think they'd get feedback on that. It's so close to him.
No, we never did. We didn't, the microphones weren't dynamic in that day. They couldn't pick up subtle things like that.
Wow.
And he's got the Royal typewriter there in the background, the old double clutcher. So, yes, George.
Yeah, that's like the one I used at Black River. Only in case you're not familiar with those, they only type in caps.
Oh,
That way there's no confusion as to what you're putting out there. You don't have the tiniest print that you're trying to see. It's all in capitals. And also on the train order, you have to spell out numbers and stations. And when you read them back to the dispatcher, but for times and things like that, you actually have to spell out the numbers.
I remember a little bit about that. Alan, you've got quite a few train orders. They're all in capital letters?
No, not all of them, but
Wow.
but it was kind of the standard to use all caps for train orders, especially when you're making multiple copies, because the the older style typewriters had a small serif letter that didn't reproduce well after you got down a few carbons. And these all cap typewriters were called mills.
No.
You
Okay.
also didn't have any punctuation,
Yeah.
no periods, commas, anything like that.
Okay. Who are these guys?
Oh, the guy on the left is Mac Dorton. He was a conductor on the Milwaukee for many years and a really good friend. He was the guy that started hauling me around on the caboose and on the Everett line
Oh,
in 1958 and got something started there. The rest of the crews kind of followed up after Mac did it, and Edwards and some of the other guys thought, well, if Mac can do it and get away with it, I guess we can too. And that's his cousin in Texas. The guy's name is also Dorton, but he's not a railroad guy. And Mac gave me this picture, kind of a sad situation. He was diagnosed with cancer, and after I'd known him for many years, I went to visit him after he became ill in Tacoma, and he brought out those pictures and gave them to me. And he later tried to give me a shoebox full of snapshots taken along the right of way and railroad pictures. This is just out of a family picture of him. But anyway, he tried to give me this shoebox full of railroad pictures, and the poor guy was dying, and I just couldn't handle the situation very well. I just didn't have the heart to take him. I thought, God, his whole life in a shoebox full of pictures, and he's trying to give them to me, and I didn't have the presence of mind to know quite how to handle it. So I said, well, why don't you hang on to those, and I'll maybe come and get them, next visit. And I didn't add if there is a next visit. Well, there wasn't. He died. I don't know what happened to the pictures, but anyway, that's who that was. And he was a old conductor on the Milwaukee and retired in about the mid 70s, I guess it was. I think Alan probably would have known him.
yeah.
He had been a boomer. He worked on just about every railroad before he came to Milwaukee.
Do you remember him, Alan?
No, actually, I don't. I did never met him. Fred Deem was pretty much the regular conductor on the Everett line when I was hanging around the railroad there, and he was a little stern sometimes. But I'd heard that he was on a train that backed over a kid or something one time, or some kid got hurt on climbing around on a train that he was conductor of. So he was pretty adamant about staying the hell away from the train.
Probably a good reason. We've only got a
Yeah.
couple pictures left, guys, so thanks for hanging in there. Oh, look, it says Dave Sprau trailer trash. Dave, what's the bird's eye lowdown on this photo?
When I went after I got a dispatcher's seniority date in 1964, I of course couldn't hold a regular job, and I figured, well, a smart thing to do would be to buy a trailer house. So I bought that one for $5,000 and moved it over to Easton for, I think it cost me $100 to have a mover move it. Lived in it for Easton for a year, and then I bid in a relief job between Canasket and Leicester and Auburn Yard, and I moved it to this is just east of the depot at Canasket. That building next to it that big building next to it is supposed to be the operator's quarters. Well, it was a trash dump. So I had this nice trailer parked next to the living quarters, supposed living quarters, and I lived in that thing until I finally moved it from Canasket over to my property over by Selleck, where I had built a house in about 1972.
So is that your car off to the right?
Off to the right, yeah, that's my Chevrolet Chevelle, 1966 Chevelle.
Figures. Yeah, those were good cars, weren't they, George?
I think so, at least, and they were still kind of the small Chevy body. They hadn't gotten a little more bloated, like the 67s on up, but yeah, nice car, and you could get a 396 in them and all that. And I suppose if you made special arrangements, you could get a 427 or something.
Ooh.
This was a 396, and I was working at Skycomish. Ike Flynn, Flynn's gas station up there, finally showed me how to adjust the tappets on the damn thing. You couldn't keep the tappets. You had to keep readjusting them on those 396s, and I finally learned how to do it just in time to sell the car.
So the building on the left, that looks like it's an old boxcar.
It is. It's just an old boxcar converted into living quarters for operators.
Isn't that kind of what you lived in when you were first up in Easton or something like that?
Well, it was an outfit car. It was nice compared to that thing.
Ooh.
My outfit car at Easton had a stove and a shower and a toilet and a bedroom separate from the living quarters. It was nice, but that thing there was just an open old boxcar with a caboose stove in it.
Is that skirting around the bottom?
Yeah.
And then what's the other little thing? Is that the two-holer or something like that?
No, that's not a two-holer. I don't know what that is. Can you enlarge that picture?
Yeah, let me see what I can do here. See if I can get it.
Oh, that's an add-on to the back of that. It looks like it's separate, but the sun is hitting it just right and lighting up the roof.
Yeah, it's kind of like a shed roof. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a coal bin for the coal stove inside there.
Oh, there you go. That makes sense.
I thought it was a ballroom or something.
Oh, don't get going on those. Okay, so where are we here? We're coming to the end here, guys. Thanks for your patience today.
Well, this is a little closer close-up. Might have been the same one as me sitting there laying like I'm passed out, but this is the Whitefish to Sandpoint job with me working in the old Seattle office, and all those lights there, they either represent trains or locked up switches or anyway, you can get a lot of trains out there. Right at the moment, it looks like I didn't have a lot of them, but what I did have, they were all clustered up around the top.
Yeah, you had that one big cluster. Let me see if I can. Yeah, it's a little hard to read what that says. So
yeah, I don't quite remember the configuration on the thing. I could eventually figure it out.
Is Sandpoint on the bottom left?
I think Sandpoint's on the upper left, top left. Yeah, that thing that they used it says Boyer, Boyer.
Boyer, yeah, that's what the Great Northern always called it. Yeah.
Yeah, we talked to the Boyer West dispatcher even on the BNSF when I was working to Spokane, so I understand Boyer.
Yeah, this is Boyer East, and let's enlarge it for a second again, please.
Yeah. Over the left or the right? Which way do you want me to go?
You've done okay. I'm just apparently Boyer West handled the Diamond Crossing there. The Diamond Crossing would have been just to the left of that upper Boyer siding.
That makes sense to me, yeah, because Boyer, the siding is it's up on the Great Northern north of Sandpoint or east of Sandpoint.
Well, they had to rename this. This used to say Sandpoint, and they put Boyer over it on the board there.
Oh, they sure did, didn't they? Using one of those like label maker things. Yeah.
I'm old label makers.
Yeah, I had one of those. I always thought
BYMO.
Right, that's what it was, and that used to be Sandpoint, and they had to change it to Boyer when they connected the two lines together, because there still was a Sandpoint siding on the old Great Northern line west of there.
Hmm.
Oh, okay. I was thinking the fact that you had Sandpoint, which was the NP depot, and then Sandpoint, the Great Northern depot. So I thought they just renamed Great Northern one Boyer then to avoid having two Sandpoints. But I see what you're saying.
Maybe that's what it is. I have to think this one over. This is another case where I'm caught flat-footed and not prepared to answer the question without doing some research.
Well, we just. As we saw last week, we winged it and we had fun, and we're going to just keep winging it. So here we go. Now we've got everybody here. Dave, who are all these people besides you?
This is again ostensibly supposed to be my last night on the NP before going to the Great Northern, but hung on about another week. And Jim Frederickson brought his camera, set it up on a tripod, and put the timer on so that he could be in the picture. The guy on the left is Paul Thompson. He was working, well, who knows? He was working one of the other dispatcher jobs. Paul had been third trick operator at Cle Elum. He was off the nickel plate. He'd been a dispatcher on the nickel plate, came to the NP, and then became a dispatcher there. In fact, he and the guy on the right of me, I'm the guy with the necktie.
I see that. Yeah, I could tell that. Yeah.
The guy on the right of me is Arnold J. McFarland. He was another one of my students. I trained both him and Paul Thompson on being a dispatcher on the NP. That particular night, Arnold was working one of the other jobs. Now, that means one of them was on the double track south and one of them was on the mountain, but I don't know which. And I was on the double track north. And then the guy on the extreme right is Jim Frederickson, who was the assistant chief, our boss on that shift that night. This is in July of 1969.
Well, this is going to be our last image. So why don't you say a few things about Jimmy before we wrap up?
Just a really wonderful assistant chief to work for. And to my regret, I used to needle Jim a little bit. He was, I wouldn't say, I wouldn't say that Jim was a company man. He would never snitch on anybody or turn anybody in if it could be avoided. But he was very, very, very much more concerned about the company's welfare than I was. Let's put it that way. And I used to needle him a little bit, and I kind of feel bad about that now because he was such a good guy, man. He was, he was just a good boss, and I can't say enough good about him, and I really appreciated having my entire association with him, both when I was a young operator and he was a dispatcher, and later when I was a dispatcher and he was my boss. And then later when we were both away from the railroad and he was, pretty much dedicated to history and was very helpful to me in trying to learn things.
It's just kind of even for people like me who never knew him, he's still an example for me.
Yeah, and Arnold McFarland, now he just died a couple of years ago up in Vader, Washington. He was 91 years old. He was a very large family, like the Shannons that we were discussing earlier. He, a whole bunch of McFarlands. Most of them were all related, and they were related to other people that didn't have that name McFarland. Oscar Larson, the agent at OMAC, was married to a McFarland girl, and it just goes on. Paul, oh God, I can't think of the name now. Anyway, they're a very large legendary family, and he came to work for the NP and was an operator around Easton and Cle Elum, and he'd been at Sumas and other places. Day operator at Stampede. He was working at Stampede on the day they shut it down and went to CTC. And,
he looks like a big guy.
Well, he was tall. He was about 6'3". Just all of the McFarlands were big guys.
Okay. And that is the end. I'm going to put this back in the gallery. That is the end of the images, Dave, that we have for today. And we're coming up to the bottom of the hour. So we're about an hour and 28 minutes into this epic program. And George, I was going to shop around for final comments.
Yeah, no problem. A little aside about Jim. If any of you went out to the Puyallup Fair, they had an area called the Hobby Hall. And most of the time they had an operating model train layout or something like that. Well, anyway, I was out there one time and they had a sort of a demonstration of Morse. And so Jim was at the thing, and what he did was he demonstrated how he did a Morse, and then he signed it, on the Morse key, and then he tore it off and declared it complete. But, just as showing how it would work for a dispatcher or a train order operator. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, you need to dig up an operator somewhere, Jonathan, and he and I can give you a demonstration on this.
Well, we've got a couple of CRF guys, Doug Oakman and Kevin Seville are still somewhat fluent in Morse code. So, that's certainly part of the deal. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to conclude our program, and then we'll stay around for a post-game show for a couple of minutes afterwards. So again, everybody, my name is Jonathan Fischer as Cascade Rail Foundation Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive presentation on people that we've known, and we've looked at some people from the past and shared some fond memories of them. So this will be going on YouTube later today, October 28th, 2025. And to all the people in the future, all I can say is I hope everything turned out okay. So until then, host and moderator Jonathan Fischer saying, come back tomorrow as we're going to have Margaret Weatherby, head of collections for the Washington State Historical Society, giving a technical presentation on the PNRA CRF program. So until then, I will just say to everybody, have a great